Defining cultural assimilation and cultural appropriation. Cultural assimilation and cultural appropriation both involve the interaction between different cultures, but they differ significantly in their intent, impact, and power dynamics. Assimilation refers to the process by which a minority group adopts the customs and practices of the dominant culture, while appropriation involves the borrowing or mimicking of elements from a culture, often without understanding or respecting its significance. Cultural assimilation. Integration into the dominant culture. Cultural assimilation occurs when a minority group adopts the customs, language, and values of a dominant culture in order to fit in or survive within society. This process may involve changing one's identity, traditions, or behaviors to align with the majority culture, sometimes at the cost of losing aspects of their original cultural identity. Cultural appropriation. Taking from another culture. Cultural appropriation refers to the adoption of elements from a minority culture by members of a more dominant culture, often in a superficial or disrespectful manner. This can include things like fashion, hairstyles, or religious symbols being used without understanding their cultural or historical context, often reducing them to trends or commodities. Power dynamics in assimilation versus appropriation. The key difference between cultural assimilation and cultural appropriation lies in the power dynamics. Assimilation typically occurs when a minority group feels pressured to conform to the norms of a dominant society, often for survival or acceptance. In contrast, cultural appropriation involves the dominant culture borrowing from marginalized cultures, frequently without regard for the original culture's history, significance, or struggles. Voluntary versus coercive nature of assimilation. Cultural assimilation can be either voluntary or coerced, depending on the social context. In some cases, minority groups may choose to assimilate for better opportunities or social mobility. However, in many situations, assimilation is pressured by societal norms, which can lead to the erasure of original cultural identities. Cultural appropriation, on the other hand, is often a one-sided act by the dominant culture, typically involving no invitation or permission from the minority group. Cultural assimilation and identity loss. In the process of cultural assimilation, individuals or groups may experience the loss of their unique cultural identity as they adopt the customs, values, and behaviors of the dominant culture. This can lead to a sense of alienation or displacement, as the minority group may feel torn between maintaining their original cultural practices and fully integrating into the dominant culture. Cultural appropriation and misrepresentation. Cultural appropriation often leads to the misrepresentation of the borrowed culture. When elements like clothing, food, or rituals are taken out of context, they can become distorted or reduced to stereotypes. This commodification can diminish the significance of these cultural practices and cause harm to the communities that originally created them. Examples of cultural assimilation in history. Historical examples of cultural assimilation include the forced assimilation of indigenous peoples during colonization, where they were compelled to adopt the language, religion, and customs of colonizing nations. Another example is the Americanization process of immigrant groups in the United States, where they were expected to abandon their native languages and traditions to integrate into mainstream American society. Examples of cultural appropriation in modern society. Cultural appropriation can be seen in various contemporary settings, such as when celebrities or fashion brands adopt traditional clothing, hairstyles, or religious symbols from marginalized cultures without understanding their deeper meaning. For example, wearing Native American headdresses as fashion accessories or using sacred African symbols as trendy tattoos are often cited as examples of cultural appropriation. Impact of cultural assimilation versus appropriation. The impact of cultural assimilation can be complex, as it may lead to greater social acceptance and integration, but it can also result in the loss of cultural diversity and heritage. Cultural appropriation, however, tends to perpetuate harmful stereotypes and cultural commodification, often causing feelings of disrespect and disempowerment among the affected cultures. Both practices can have long-lasting consequences on the cultural identity of marginalized groups.